But we'll welcome, guys. Welcome, hello everyone. For those of you tuning in, and this one's not live at all. It's just us, obviously. So welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Herps. I have with me Francis Cosquieri.
Very good. Yes.
Okay, I just realized as I started to say, and I was like, I've never said his last name out loud to him before. Okay, Francis
You were one
Cosquieri.
of the elite people that has joined the small number of people that has actually pronounced it right first time.
First time.
Congratulations.
And Christian Di Filio, who I intentionally mispronounced his
that's what I thought.
But Christian, you're over there. What are you doing? So you're normally out here stateside, and Francis is in England. So tell me, why are you guys together instead of on separate screens here?
Oh, it's just the awesome broship.
The awesome broship and
oh, perfect
VHS conference that was last weekend.
How did it go with the BHS conference? That's the thing, is a joint partnership. Is it still a partnership with Advancing Herpetological Husbandry, or is it?
Yeah, so it's actually it's a partnership between the Facebook group AHH, which is the group I co-founded, Advancing Herpetological Husbandry, the British Herpetological Society (BHS), and also we can't not mention Drayton Manor Zoo because they very kindly host us every year. And they're really supportive of the event, improving welfare in captive keeping, and they very much share the mindset of the two groups. So like we cannot sort of not mention them as well.
Yeah,
it's also got quite a number of sponsors among the industry. So sort of a big plug to them. Thanks to all of the sponsors that have taken time out and money to support the conference and educate people. In between the talks.
Right on. And is it, there's one that goes on in the US too, right? Or is that still in the works, or what's the story with that?
So we had one in 2019, which was in the Chiricahua Desert Museum. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
We have Christian is sort of leading up, following that on the next one. We're hoping that there'll be more.
The goal's next year, so
yeah,
I hope get the Americans involved as well.
Yeah, without breaking out the passport. I have my my real ID. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Christian might be aware. That's like a new thing that we use for air travel here in the States. But I don't quite have my passport yet, so I need to buckle down and get that if I hope to go attend one of those. But look, guys, I'm super happy to have you. I think this is really good fortuitous timing to get you guys both in there, because it's the stuff we kind of have nerded out about in the past, just talking about obviously reptiles and snakes. And for those of you who don't know, Francis and Christian are both very knowledgeable folks about snakes. I've learned so much from Francis. I always feel that anytime that there's an article or a source that I don't have or don't know where to find it, I was like, oh, I'll just message Francis and he'll tell me where to be. It's like, oh, I can give you 3 researchers who wrote on that very subject, plus 2 who did it on corn snakes and Burmese pythons. I was like, oh, that's exactly what I needed. So for those of you who don't know Francis, you really should. And Christian and I get along quite well as well. So it's great to have you guys on the channel. Christian I've had before. Francis, this is the first time, right?
Good to be here.
Yeah, yep. Thank you. So like I said, you're one of my go-to sources for herp info whenever I need it. But I think the thing that we really wanted to discuss, because there's a lot of that, and like you said, the AHH forum and the BHS event, those are great venues to advance herpetological husbandry and to promote the welfare and to work with Drayton Zoo and all that. But I'm kind of not really the expert in all that stuff. I want to talk about nerdy things. So I've invited you guys both on to talk about herps within the fantasy realm. So stuff that's all made up. So if you guys want to compare it to real animals, or if any of it comes up, obviously that's not out of the question. It's something that we all like. But let's stay in the fantasy world, shall we? And
the nerd world.
The nerd.
Yeah. And like, so just like introductions and that stuff, sort of like where we're coming from with this. I'm really more of a Star Wars nerd. Like if I have to narrow it down to one fandom, above all else, and from there, I'll dabble with Tolkien and some more modern stuff, Game of Thrones. But beyond just the reptiles of the world, what would you say? What kind of nerd are you, Francis?
How shall we put this? I'm the king nerd.
The king nerd. These are all D&D minis.
That's another one too. So Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, if you follow Francis on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see a lot of the miniatures that you're always painting too, and so you use those in the games, huh?
So, I mean, I love Star Wars as well. Dinosaurs. I started with dinosaurs. And I love Tolkien, Song of Ice and Fire, Wheel of Time. So, I mean, I love fantasy in general. And of course, the minis, the models of them, sort of film reproductions and toy dragons and so on. So I got into D&D.
D&D, Pathfinder, Magic the Gathering, which is a card game. Kind of Yu-Gi-Oh, but not.
See, I don't play Magic, but I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh, so I was kind of into Yu-Gi-Oh as well.
What's Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yu-Gi-Oh.
It's another card game.
Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh. I think you said UV. Oh, and I was like, I know UVA, I know UVB.
Oh,
I've never heard of that one. That's funny. No, I mean, Magic the Gathering. You're talking to, I mean, people my age. I think we know Magic a lot more than we know Yu-Gi-Oh. Right? Didn't Magic came out first, right? Or am I wrong about that?
I'm pretty sure you're right.
I think so. I definitely remember Magic being in
Magic
schools.
was 93, 94.
Yeah, then
I was in elementary school.
I think.
Okay. Well, let's move in a little bit more specific. So, we'll start with you, Francis. Amongst friction or fiction, which world or universe has the best fantasy herps or the best portrayal of them?
Ooh, there's so many. I'm gonna go for variety. I'm gonna say Dungeons and Dragons. It's got the best dragons. It's got a lot of like reptile related creatures as well. But I'm all for the dragons, as you can see from the back. So I'm gonna say D&D probably. I mean, I kind of like Avatar as well, but
that's a good one. I didn't think about that one.
Yeah, it's never really confirmed they're actually reptiles though, so they're kind of reptilian looking. But I'm gonna sort of not include them because they've got so many unique sort of evolutionary traits, like those sort of sphericals in the chest that they breathe through. And so I want to say they're not really reptiles, but I would say the best, like my favorite, would be Dungeons and Dragons, just because of the variety.
And so
there's nothing more fun than dropping a great big dragon model in front of my party and just making them shriek.
No, not fun at all.
So tell me about that, because that's not a world I'm into. I don't get into the role-playing games. It sounds like a blast. It's not like it's something I hate, but what's the how does that work? So why are dragons a big deal in the game? Like what's the challenge? Is it just something cool to look at? I don't know.
It's in the name, isn't it? It's like they're the classic kind of fantasy monster archetype. I mean, if you look at mythology, dragons are always like the end boss, the most powerful, the strongest, the most dangerous, or the most wise and mysterious. If you look at, I mean, that isn't even fantasy. That's in real world mythologies. If you look at dragons, I mean, the great Norse sort of folk tales, you've got Fafnir and Siegfried. Beowulf is sort of does a mutual kill with a nameless dragon as well. You've got St. George, patron saint of England, and the dragon. They're always seen as the
St. Martha with the Tarrasque.
Yeah, that's true in France. Yeah, so I mean, they're always going to be seen as
like
that,
Christian?
St. Martha and the Tarrasque in France.
Okay, yeah, more.
So that was a story of like an invincible dragon that was tamed by a saint. But they're always kind of like at the apex of fantasy creatures, I suppose. So that's why I like them anyway. And because they're reptilian, that almost like dinosaurs as well. So I've always liked them for that reason.
I could really get behind that. I like it's always fascinating to see. I've always liked predators and apex predators. And so you could just imagine. I have this imagination going of what it would be like if dinosaurs still existed, and then when you see things with dragons, just trying to put a dragon in your head in the real world is like, blows your mind a little bit to think like this would be the king of all predators. But I get it. So they're pretty cool. What one thing that I always notice in so many realms, and maybe if you guys know of any where it doesn't happen, tell me, but dragons always, one of the themes always goes like, one, they're big, one, they breathe fire, most of them fly, most of them breathe fire too, most of them fly, but in a lot of them, they're very, like, they're smarter than people too, and they either can communicate or not, but either way, it's like they know what we're saying. Is there, where do you guys think, why do you think that comes from? Is there any sort of basis in that? Are there any stories of, because you sounded like you were hinting on it with some of the Norse legends, but I just don't know any of the background to it. So I was wondering if you.
I mean, it's a lot of legends actually. So I mean, if you look at even Oriental mythology, you've got dragons there, but they're less outright evil, and they tend to be more neutral. Yeah, some are good, some can be violent, but they're always intelligent. They they sort of control weather and rivers. I think that the intelligence as well, it's very linked to Christian beliefs, not his belief, but Christianity. So like even Satan, the devil, is supposed to come out as a red dragon, in Revelation. Again, going back to that whole idea of the end boss, the most powerful of enemies.
And like all good screenwriters, we got a glimpse of him in his lesser form as just a serpent in the beginning of the book as well. So that's exactly. I like the I like the bookend there for literature's sake.
And in a way, Christianity really shaped mankind's or Westerners' sort of relationship with reptiles. It very much made them go from a type of animal that was often revered or seen as sort of mysterious and to do with
something to be respected.
Yeah, well, to be some there were dangerous reptiles in other mythologies, but they were also far more likely to be seen as the wise, the mysterious, and immortal. They were symbols of immortality. The whole snake shedding its skin. Whereas when Christianity came along, the whole upon thy belly thou shalt go, and the whole devil as snake and the temptation of Eve kind of lead them to be the villains, the outright villains, and that was where they really started getting their bad rap from. But yeah, I mean, in terms of intelligence, going back to the D&D thing, like dragons are supposed to be more clever than the players, which in some cases isn't that difficult. So it's it's like an excuse for the games master to just say, I'm going to stop playing as if I was a monster, and I can now play as if I'm
a mastermind.
So just like this diabolical mastermind that instantly understands how everything works and is going to just take your team apart. I think the first time that I threw one at the team, they expected it to just be a normal fight where they could run around and hit it, and I just I just spent with all of that. I just had him pick up one of the players and fly up and just drop him. They were not expecting that.
Oh man. So how's that work? How much time do you spend, the campaigns, right? Dungeons and Dragons campaign. How much time do you spend like preparing something ahead of time before you'll host anything like that?
Not too long. I mean, we've been running this particular campaign, which is my first actually. I only started during COVID, although I had a lot of the material before that. But we've been running this one since 2020, so this is year 4. In fact, it was the anniversary a few weeks ago.
It was, yeah.
And so individually preparing, it can be as little as a few minutes if it's something that I've had prepared for a while, because I tend to prepare in batches for a few weeks in advance. It just saves me time. I might spend a day or two getting things ready, and then that will last me for months. Very often it's a sort of seat of the pants more often than I'd like to admit.
Okay, well, good. I always wondered about that, because I just didn't know. I just had this image in my head of D&D dungeon masters who are just like the most prepared people on the planet. So it relieves me a little bit to know. Good. That relieves me a little bit to know. I just, what is it? It's comforting to know that other people are seat of the pants, last minute thinkers the same way. So
what's that? You thought of something I hadn't prepared for? Oh, here is a set of orcs coming to attack you just to give me some time.
Got it. What I feel like I know where this is headed based on what's going, but you might surprise me, is one thought I had. What are the dragons good or evil in Dungeons and Dragons? Or is it something else?
Yeah, you've got all kinds. So there's lots of different types. They're kind of color coded. So we've got the coloured dragons, the chromatic dragons. They've got this is really nerdy now, isn't it? So you've got red, blue, green, black, and white, and they are generally evil. And then you've got metallic dragons, which are gold, silver, copper, bronze, and brass. And there are some older ones as well. There's orichalcum and steel and so on, which are generally good. But it's a made-up game. You can do whatever you want. So if you want to have a good chromatic or an evil metallic, you can. And then you've got gem dragons, different types of crystal type dragons, which are neutral. There's a lot of dragons in that game, to be fair.
Well, and also you got to look at it in the aspect of dragons are much more powerful beings than humans. So what they might consider good or lawful for a metallic dragon could morally be considered evil to some.
There's some really
good people. Yeah,
there's some really good stuff in Pathfinder, actually, like where the gold dragon just becomes a tyrant for the greater good.
Right, yeah. But like it's for the good of mankind, but they still massacre thousands of people in the name of that.
A benevolent tyrant.
Yeah, that sort of thing. I mean, it's an animal or a creature that lives at least for thousands and thousands of years, if not forever. So it's bound to have a different outlook on, a different perspective on thing, and that's one of the challenges of trying to play as one. Give your party something to think about.
Right? Do they all breathe fire?
No. So on the chromatic side, reds breathe fire, blue breathes lightning, green breathes poison, black breathes acid, white breathes ice. And on the metallic side, they tend to have sort of dual, sort of double breath. So some have got fire and sleep, or ice and paralysis, and so on. But
it's all over. That's pretty cool.
Dragons.
What, Chris?
Can't forget about fairy dragons either.
Paralyzing breath.
What's a fairy dragon?
So take your, mental image of a dragon.
Yep.
Make it really tiny. Give it butterfly wings, and make it capricious as hell.
You're having flashbacks.
I'm having flashbacks.
Basically, it's like a troll in human form. I mean, an internet troll that
form. I love it. Well, okay, I get behind that. Well, if we're talking dragons, you guys have educated me a lot on some of those things. But let's go. There's some other worlds too. So let's do the corny question, the battle royale. If we're putting all the dragons in a room together, if we're talking Dungeons and Dragons, Tolkien's dragons, the dragons from A Song of Ice and Fire, and then there's another one that you'd sent over, Temeraire. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So tell me, which dragons are leaving that arena and which ones are...
This is a proper nerd out session.
Getting buried.
All right, so I'm ruling out Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire dragons straight away, as they're basically animals and not very big.
They're not very big.
They're not very big, no.
Not compared to
Tolkien and D&D. So I'm going to rule out Tolkien as well, simply because
we don't know enough about some of them.
Yeah, and there's one in particular in Tolkien mythos called Ancalagon the Black, which everyone always brings out because there's been a lot of fan art that has greatly exaggerated its size. But actually, in preparation for this talk, I read the bit of the Silmarillion where he comes out, and actually everything that people say online is grossly just overstated. Yeah. So they say he smashes a mountain when he's killed. No, it says that he comes out of a hole in the mountain, Angband, and when he's killed by Eärendil in his flying ship with the help of the eagle Thorondor, he doesn't smash a mountain, he smashes the 3 towers of Thangorodrim. And I think people have just said that Tolkien is saying the towers are the mountains, and I don't really see that. So the Tolkien dragons are powerful and often magical as well. So we see Smaug and Glaurung, who's another one in the Silmarillion who fights Turin Turambar. Uses a lot of magic, but I'm going to rule them out as well because although they are very intelligent, they're just not anywhere near D&D dragon size. So Temeraire is a series of novels by Naomi Novik, fantastic. It's basically the Napoleonic Wars, but on dragons.
Okay.
And it's actually really, really well done because she puts a lot of emphasis on the different breeds. So they actually feel like a very real lived-in universe where people have bred these creatures for war. And there's quite a lot of history as to how the different dragon types were bred. And you read through it and you just think, morphs.
Right.
This is literally like the royal python of dragons where they just breed different sizes and colors and so on. But again, I believe that the biggest ones in that mythos are about 120 to 180 feet. So still pretty big, kind of like Smaug size in the Hobbit movies, but not, near the top. And I'm going to ignore things like cartoons and anime and all that because there's just too many. I don't know. What are the Magic the Gathering dragons?
I was going to see Magic doesn't do a good job of necessarily always explaining how large some of their dragons are. But like I was going to bring up, I honestly think one could make the argument that it would be a draw between D&D dragons and Magic dragons because
you're gonna have to bring out some pretty big feats to convince me of that.
because there are dragons in Magic that just simply cannot be killed flat out.
I mean, there are deities of dragons like Tiamat, Bahamut in D&D.
Right, so that's why I'm saying there's literally on both sides of the.
But I'm going to trump that. So Tiamat, so the most famous, I suppose, D&D dragon. If you ever watched the 80s cartoon, you probably remember the multi-headed female dragon that even the devil, like the villain Venger, was scared of.
Well, I'm going to put full disclosure. So the way I grew up, Dungeons and Dragons was like, apparently it was the thing that devil worshippers did. And
yeah, the Satanic Panic.
Yeah, totally. So no, like I didn't realize until probably my early 30s. No, wow. I probably would have been evicted from my house at the age of 4 if I'd have watched that cartoon. So,
oh my gosh. So there was an 80s cartoon that was not really related to the game, but it's a classic for like 80s kids, where they, and this dragon queen comes out, Tiamat, who's a 5-headed dragon with a head of each color.
Yeah.
And depending on the edition of the game that you're playing, she can warp reality. Like in 2 and 3, she can just decide that she can change things size, she can warp reality, alter reality. Even in the arguably less powerful 5 and 5th edition, she's immune to spells below 6th level. You only ever fight avatars of her because she's a goddess. So she is gonna be up there. She's magically powerful, she can just fling spells. She's got 5 different breath weapon attacks. But I'm gonna one up you. I'm gonna get really nerdy, Christian.
Okay.
Io, or Astragath, who is the creator of Tiamat and Bahamut and the other dragon gods, and is basically a sort of multiversal dragon. So I'm going to say that trumps. But if we rule out that, let's put Io to one side. So Tiamat versus what's the best that Magic has got?
Let's stick with mortals. How about that?
All right.
Okay, mortals. If you're going mortal, if you're going mortal, I'd say Magic the Gathering because I don't think there's a mortal D&D dragon.
I've got one
that can just
not in D&D. There is one other franchise that we haven't mentioned, and it's like the obvious reptile franchise. It is the longest running film series in history. Come on, icon of Japanese culture. Pop phenomenon.
You're talking about Godzilla?
The Big G and King Ghidorah. So I don't know. Right. King Ghidorah is up there.
All right, I'm putting Godzilla on the top. That's it, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that Tiamat beats Godzilla just because of the magic, but Godzilla is bigger, and in terms of feats, I mean, depending on which
there's definitely dragons in Magic the Gathering that are bigger than Godzilla. And Ghidorah.
I don't know, Godzilla.
Bigger than Godzilla.
Yeah. Well, Godzilla. So I have to admit, I was a massive Godzilla nerd when I was young. So from and Godzilla's really inconsistent because Godzilla, the original Godzilla, was only 50 meters, and I think the most recent one in the Western one, he is is he 118 meters tall or something like that? So he's very no. Shin Godzilla is taller than the Universal Godzilla. So Shin Godzilla is at 118, and I think the Western Godzilla is 108. I can that's really nerdy of me, but I used to love watching the Showa era, the Toa era, just the different sort of films of the guys in rubber suits where he would basically like chili breath his way across the screen to like pile drive someone with a kick, or just do that weird sort of funny dance. So I was actually I was really happy with the recent Godzilla King of Monsters. I didn't like Godzilla versus Kong as much, but I have to admit we all went to see Godzilla King of Monsters together in the cinema, and I was absolutely overjoyed. It was like my inner kid just came out because it had so many Easter eggs and callbacks to the original era. They had Ji Zhang. They didn't say anything about it, but they had photos of her with her twin.
Oh, really? I didn't catch any of that.
So that was the Mothra films, and the original Mothra monster had sort of two twin fairies. And again, they sort of varied. They were either fairies or human girls, but they were always twins. And I thought that was a really nice callback when they showed Ji Zhang as twins. But they didn't kind of ascribe anything mystical to it. It was just there, and I thought that's awesome. The music was amazing because they actually, again, Mothra used to be my favorite. And Mothra had a song that they used to call to summon her, which was, one of those really cheesy, almost kids cartoon kind of things, but there was a song. And they incorporated that in the actual soundtrack, and I was literally tearing up. So I went with my wife and a bunch of other friends, and I was literally just elbowing, like, I know this. But that's just like the nostalgia, something that when you're a kid is almost like a core memory. Seeing it with that kind of special effects was so good.
I didn't know it was the same tune. I remember thinking like when I first watched the old Mothra, I was like, so like is that like just like a kid's on a flute or like a recorder that's playing for this moth?
They used to
and
have.
Then I always thought it was like
as well. So there were words, there were lyrics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know them, but they were in Indonesian. but they used to sing, and it was a bit quicker. And in this film, it was a bit sort of slower, more melodic. But I really did
that. I really enjoyed those movies. I remember I had years ago when the first Godzilla of this franchise came out. I was taking improv classes at the Groundlings, and my teacher, shout out Guy Stevenson, he said he got back from the movie, and we're like, oh, he was a big, like, he loved action movies and writing stuff. And so before class, we're warming up, we're just chatting, and we're like, oh, you saw Godzilla last night? How was it? And he's like, he is so big, and he couldn't get over it. Like he was just like still stunned like 12 hours later. And then I saw the movie like the next week, and I came back and I was like, Godzilla's huge.
It was awesome. Have you seen the newer ones, the Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1, the Japanese ones?
No, I haven't yet. I rarely leave the house, so I need to stream it. So I wanted to see where it's when it's streaming, but I've heard great things about it, and it sounds like it's actually a good movie, which I like. The other stuff just for Godzilla and the fights and the monsters and breaking stuff, like it's pure popcorn.
Yeah, right? No, the Godzilla -1 is, you get really wrapped up in the actual characters. It's really emotional, actually, because obviously it's much more of a callback to World War II and the whole atomic bombing and so on. And then Shin Godzilla is weird, but it's good weird. So I don't know if you know the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion.
I've heard of it.
So the director of that, I mean, that anime is an absolute mind screw if you watch it all at once. And the director of that, Hideaki Anno, was the one that did Shin Godzilla.
Yep. And
you can see the influences, like this just whole kind of like almost like Lovecraftian aspect to Godzilla, where there's a bit where, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a bit where there were like humanoid things starting to evolve out of his tail at the end, and it was just, what the hell? It was such a weird take on Godzilla. But it's worth watching as well.
That's one of the things that I have the hardest time dealing with the modern Godzillas, and the King Kong is the Hollow Earth deal and stuff. It's just like
it went too fantasy for me. I like the realism of the first two, 2014 and 2019 King of the Monsters. I didn't like Godzilla versus Kong, although the fight scenes were good. But that whole Hollow Earth thing was a bit odd.
It's just is crazy. And I have a hard time with the hardest part I have about it is that that's a real conspiracy theory, is that we have a hollow earth, and I'm just like,
yeah.
Don't encourage the craziness.
Well, I mean that goes back to Norse mythology as well, the hidden earth and the Holdar.
Sure.
Yeah, and the elves. You know, we nowadays we see, because of Tolkien, elves as these sort of beings of light and magic, and the original elves were a lot sort of scarier and darker. You
Sinister,
know, stealing babies and
even Tolkien
things in their place.
Even Tolkien, he originally called them gnomes. You know, they weren't even elves, because I think part of that was the case, right? That elves had sort of they didn't have the definition because he hadn't made them the way that he made them yet. So that's a good point. Sticking with dragons, there's another one I was thinking of too when it comes to modern franchises. Well, it's not even a franchise. I don't think there's a sequel. Have you guys seen, and it's probably 20 years old now, the Matthew McConaughey movie? Yeah, Reign of Fire.
Reign of Fire. I knew that was what you were going to do.
That's another massive dragon at the end too. Where does that guy stand?
Pretty low.
Pretty low, honestly.
I would say that would be on par with the
Game of Thrones.
Fire Dragons. Yeah, it was very animalistic. It was an awesome movie though. I really liked it. In fact, when it first came out, I used to have the poster of it. My mother went to get it for me from the cinema, and they said, "No,
I know the poster. It's a good one."
But this was the massive one that they had on the front, so it used to be stretched across my entire room wall. And she kept on asking for them, and eventually they said, "Okay, just take it." So I had to have that. So yeah, that
people might be surprised what you can get if you just ask, like, even strangers.
Nicely,
yeah, and then ask the second and third time too.
In the cinemas, like, quite often they would throw that kind of stuff. So they would give it to you if you asked at the end of the film's run, or they used to. Nowadays, I don't know. But that does actually bring me back to something that I was mentioning to Christian earlier about types of dragons. So Reign of Fire and the Hobbit, Smaug. A lot of people call them Wyverns because they're more realistic, you would say, because obviously vertebrates have got 4 limbs. So even like a bat has got, 2 hands and 2 legs. So a dragon, in mythology, a dragon will have 4 legs and wings. So that's actually a 6-limbed creature, which is really fantastical. And in fact, most of the depictions that we have dragons wouldn't work because you can't have another pair of limbs, without another pair of shoulders with wings. Whereas the wyvern type, are the sort of ones which just have back legs and the front legs are the wing. And I get endlessly annoyed by people who say that, because wyverns are dragons, first of all, and there's no rules that ever codify how many limbs a dragon has. Like the fancy dragons do have 2 legs and a wing. 4 legs and wings, but you can't just say that wyverns or dragons with 2 legs and 4 arms as wings are not dragons.
Right. Yeah,
I think that stems from British heraldry or European heraldry. So the wyvern was a type of heraldic beast, just as the dragon was. You'd have them depicted in like rampant pose or so on.
Yeah.
But they were never ever stated to not be dragons, more like a type of dragon. And I think what was different with them, it was more that they had a stinger on the tail and didn't necessarily breathe fire.
Okay.
So, but you always it's almost like in the herpetological circles, you see venom versus poison. That kind of, well, actually.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
It's like that. It's like, no, venom is poison, and, a wyvern is a dragon. Are you really going to differentiate between the house-sized flying scaly creature on wings that's flying down to eat you?
Let's worry about the science after we make sure the thing doesn't kill us.
Well, then let me ask you this one. So this is a real test to see how flexible you are on that one. Is a luck dragon a dragon?
When you say a luck dragon, do you mean
from the Neverending Story? Sorry,
so from Neverending Story. So I'm going to say
Falcor a dragon.
Well, he's a dragon because, like, dragons are basically myth. They're made up creatures, so they can be whatever you want. If you look at the dragon or Smaug in the animated Hobbit, I think it was Ralph Bakshi that did that. He also is kind of like mammalian, cat-like. So he's definitely got fur. He's got like a sort of beard. So
he does have fur. You're right.
Yeah. So he is definitely a dragon, but he hasn't got the traditional scales all over him. I would say Falcor is a dragon, but he's not reptilian.
He's not a reptile.
He's not a reptile.
He's not 100% reptile.
Well, he's got hair, so he's got to be a synapsid, not a sauropsid. If we're talking about amniotic vertebrates, he's got to be synapsid because he's got hairy integument, not scales or feathers. And he's got canine nose. He hasn't got a reptilian nose. Yeah. So I'm going to say he's not a reptile, but he could be. You could call him a dragon. But, dragons are made up things. So,
yeah.
But if we're going to look, I mean, if you're going to really have to look, you're going to have to look at his temporal fenestrae to see whether or not he's a reptile or not. Were you expecting that
answer? Does he? I don't remember the end of that. Is he in both movies, 1 and 2? Never Ending Story. I don't remember.
And in 3. Yeah, he's in.
And 3. I forgot that there was even a third one.
3 is forgettable.
Yeah, we don't
talk about the third one.
It's funny. What about? So there was someone else. You guys introduced me to. Okay, so let's say let's stick on dragons. One more thing too.
I'm always happy to talk about dragons.
Yeah.
What? They're going to be making memes about us. I don't know if you saw the Starsky and Hutch movie with Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller. The guy in jail with the dragons. They're going to be making memes of us like that guy.
I'm okay with this.
No, I'm not okay with this. That's him, not me. I'm only interested in the scientific aspect.
Well, if it's any better, I totally forgot the last little impromptu question I had, so we'll just move on anyways.
Oh no,
it's all good. So let's switch gears a bit. I think in herpetoculture, right, snakes get a great deal of attention. I think usually that's, and maybe that's a personal bias because that's all I keep are snakes. But I feel that in the fantasy realm, we really overlook them. They're either mostly evil beings or left out entirely. So I want to ask, why don't snakes get the hero treatment, or do they?
They used to, I would say. So snakes are an interesting one. And we spoke about Christianity basically ruining their rep.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Christian.
Yep.
I think snakes are great too. I think that I would actually go as far as to say that snakes are the best reptiles to keep as pets, but I'm biased. But as organisms, I actually think that they are easier to keep in general than lizards or tortoises and so on. Not that there's anything wrong with any of them, but I think snakes are just particularly good in captivity for a number of reasons. So snakes are really interesting because mythology changed them about the time of Christianity. Before that, snakes were heroic. I mean, there were villainous or evil snakes. Yeah. So there were the snakes that were sent to kill Heracles, as a baby.
Yeah.
There's Apophis or Apep, the Egyptian sort of god of darkness, who Ra has to fight every night as he sails his boat across the sky.
So he doesn't eat the sun.
Yeah, exactly. So there were definitely villainous snakes, but there were also very many wise, mystical, heroic snakes. So you only have to look at Wadjet, again in Egypt, who helped nurse Horus. And in fact, they were seen as royalty in a lot of cultures. So if you look at, again, Egypt, the sign of the pharaoh was the uraeus, the cobra over the crown. That was the ultimate sign of pharaohhood, I suppose. And that, again, was signifying the aspect of Wadjet, the snake goddess. If you look in Buddhism, or I mean, like Hinduism, Buddhism venerate snakes.
They do, yeah.
Like one of the stories of why monocled cobras have the spectacle mark on the back of their hood is that one of them once provided shelter to Buddha by spreading its hood over him, and ostensibly touched it, and that's his finger mark. You look at the Nagas, there were good and bad Nagas in Hindu mythology, but if you ever look at Hindu goddesses and gods, they've very often got sort of cobras sort of in the background. Greek mythology, you've got Asclepius. I mean, I keep Aesculapian snakes, and that history, that mythology is fantastic. So there was a healer called Asclepios who once witnessed a snake being killed, and then the story goes that he watched another snake come out with and bring in a special leaf and restore it to life. And from then he became kind of a herbologist and realized that there were life-giving or restorative powers in different leaves, to the point that if you actually look at the symbols of the medical profession, there's not just one, there's two, and they always get mixed up. So you've got the rod of Asclepius, who is that healer. which is his staff, which has an Asclepian snake around it, one snake. And that is used, for example, on the symbol of the first responders star, or the emergency services star. And then you've also got the caduceus, which is the Hippocratic symbol, which is the rod with two snakes. But that one is a little bit disputed, because that one also means balance and commerce. That was a symbol of commerce.
Right.
And that was carried by, I mean, the Greeks kind of stole it, but it was Hermes that carried that one in his left hand. But before this, if you look at Mesopotamian religion, there's definitely images of rods with two snakes, even from like 3,000 or 4,000 BC. So they were definitely viewed as symbols of not just death and things to be feared, but mysticism. They symbolized immortality. The whole idea of the snake restoring itself by shedding its skin. In fact, like Asclepios again was a really interesting character, because they say that he learned,
or eating its own tail too.
The Ouroboros, yeah, absolutely. The Ouroboros is the infinity symbol. But Asclepios was said to stop the body withering and return youthfulness like a snake.
Yeah.
They saw age just withering the body, and snakes could get rid of this by shedding their skin and coming out all lovely and bright and shiny. So we've kind of like digressed again, which I have a habit of doing, but there are heroic depictions of snakes, and one of my favorites, and Disney really has a lot to answer for bastardizing this, was Kaa from The Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling.
I loved Kaa.
I loved Kaa, the book version, because Rudyard Kipling really seemed to have a thing for snakes. If you look at Shere Khan, the villain, the villain in one of the stories, Shere Khan is lame. He's not this kind of like regal, powerful, aristocratic character that Disney portrayed him as. He's a spiteful, bitter, man-hating, lame character that the wolves actually make fun of in the books.
Oh, really?
And that's why he's dangerous for Mowgli. Whereas Kaa is always treated, and always described as being kind of like honorable, powerful, terrifying in his own way, to the point that even Baloo and Bagheera are scared of him when he does this sort of dance to fascinate the Bandalog, the monkeys, and they have to sort of pull themselves away to stop following them down his gullet. And I always love the way that Rudyard Kipling describes his snakes. Father Cobra.
Well, okay, so let me interrupt a little bit. In the book, because in the movie he's kind of a mix between a python and a cobra, like realistically, like he's coiling most things and constricting. What is he?
In the book, they call him a rock python, which is what they used to call Indian pythons, Burmese pythons, so Python molurus. You could argue reticulated, because his size is, I think he says that he's about 8 or 9 meters long, which is going to be a retic, and a very, very big retic at that.
Big one.
But he uses the word a rock python more than once. So that would kind of indicate an Indian python. But, it's kind of splitting hairs. He's a big python. There are cobras and venomous snakes in Rudyard Kipling's books as well. So in The King's Ankh, which is another Mowgli story, there is a father cobra who is a very wise, but so old that he's not dangerous anymore. But Mowgli shows him respect. And then you've got Rikki Tikki Tavi, actually, where the snakes are definitely villainous.
Yeah.
So, like, although they are villains, they again are definitely accorded, like, they're things to be feared. They're not like Shere Khan, they're almost like a figure of ridicule. They're very definitely like the kings of their environment. So there are definitely more snakes. I mean, Lucy Liu played
snake just came to mind, and I just looked in what?
Kung Fu Panda, Master Viper, one of the Furious Five, but she gets like no speaking lines really. Right. But that's definitely a good snake. But yeah, there aren't many, and I think Christianity has a lot to answer for that.
I do love Kung Fu Panda. There was one I was thinking of. I don't know if you guys are familiar with. I just had to look up his name. Do you guys know the Jedi Nakata del Gormo?
I don't.
He's from the old Star Wars Legends, and He's yeah. So it's old stuff. It's not canon anymore. But he was supposedly Master Yoda's master, and he's this giant serpent-like creature with. They got 4 arms, so it's not the same, and 4 eyes. But he was out on Dagobah. I think that's his home world, and I think yeah.
I mean, there's a few reptile kind of like forgetting snakes and dragons, but in the Star Wars universe, you've got the Trandoshans as well, which are the Bosk, the bounty hunter.
Oh yeah. Famed enemies of the Wookiees.
Yeah, and then you've also got a little bit deeper, but you've got the Faline, which is I think it was the 95, 96. They made a really good multi-platform story called Shadows of the Empire, which was set between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and it explains how Han Solo gets to Jabba's palace and how Princess Leia gets that armor that she's wearing and so on. And the main villain of that, Prince Shizor, is a reptilian alien, but like he's depicted as very handsome and seductive. I suppose like that's another thing about reptiles that we've kind of seen fade out recently, but in the older mythologies, reptiles were seen as very seductive. I've just thought of a really good heroic snake in a minute. One of my favorites. I can't believe I didn't remember. But one of the traits of Prince Shizor was that he could put out pheromones to attract the opposite sex, and he kind of tries to seduce Leia. Unfortunately, Darth Vader murders him, like as with so often. But yeah, we were talking about heroic snakes. Again, other cultures showing the difference between Western perceptions of reptiles. Do you know the story of Lady White Snake?
Oh, yeah.
By Xu Zhen. So
this is it broke up a little bit. The story of who?
Lady White Snake by Xu Zhen. She's a Chinese kind of romantic figure. So the story goes there was a white snake, and white snakes are seen as very lucky in Asian cultures. So Shirohebi in Japan, the white snake in China. I think they're in Vietnam and Taiwan as well. You've got a similar story. But the story goes that the white snake turned into a beautiful human woman and fell in love with a farmer or a itinerant monk, or it varies in the story, and they became husband and wife. And the white snake had a sister who was a green snake as well. So there was a monk who more recently has been depicted as evil, but I don't think he was necessarily evil. I think he was just bigoted against non-humans. Fahai, I believe it was, who basically tries to split them up and imprison the white snake. And when the farmer sees that his wife is a snake, he gets terrified and runs away. There are different versions of the story. Some say that he kills himself, some that she saves him. But it ends up with the monk imprisoning her under a massive pagoda, which is, we've seen it, it's in Hangzhou, a beautiful pagoda out in China. There's another one in Taiwan built in her honor. And it's seen as a very romantic story. So she's definitely a good and heroic figure, very sort of tragic, lost love. And I don't know if you guys will have seen these. I think that they have been on Netflix, but they've even done some animated films with her recently. I think it was Laser Light Studios in China. But they've called one called White Snake and then a sequel called Green Snake, which is her sister. And, I've always really liked that fairy tale, actually, just the.
Yeah, that's nice. I anytime now that I'm hearing White Snake, I just have here I go again.
Yes, that is the correct response.
So I'm just it's sorry for my ADD brain switching gears on that. What this reminded me too when I started talking about Yoda. There's the if you guys remember the scene in Empire when there's the king snake inside the little hut with Luke in there. How annoyed do you get when you see a reptile as a pet in a movie, especially if it's kept badly? Like, so for me, or like Indiana Jones, when they're like, "Wow, look out for these venomous snakes," and it's like ball pythons and glass snakes.
Glass
lizards.
With my mother-in-law because she had never seen it, and I was watching it, and I was like, "These are not snakes; these are lizards." Like most of the snakes are glass lizards.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't get that annoyed except by the bad husbandry. I think any film that depicts reptile keeping in a positive light is great. because it normalizes it. It takes us away from the periphery and shows that, yeah, this is a legitimate hobby. Normal people do this. I think it's great to see that kind of depiction where it's actually seen as a perfectly okay thing. Obviously, bad husbandry is bad husbandry. We see it everywhere. So I suppose we're kind of inured to it now over the years. I don't sort of stand up and start pointing at the cinema and start shouting, how dare they keep it like that? It is upsetting. But
you're not going to walk out.
Normalizing keeping in films like that is great. I don't know if you guys in America have ever seen it, but there was an advert for one of the banks here. I think it was HSBC, but it showed a little girl that had a pet ball python. But it was set in Asia, and I think Singapore, and they're moving from one Asian country to another, and the little girl is upset because the parents let the snake go. That's not such a good thing, but you can see that the girl is attached to her pet, and it's in a cute way, and she's very upset on the trip and the flight that she goes to another country. They bring her to the new house, and she looks up and she's really happy because now there's a tank with a really big tank with a bearded dragon. And she just gets all happy and runs up and sort of presses up against the glass. I really love that advert. Obviously, you don't let pets go in the wild, and it wasn't a native species. Yeah, you can level all that, but the depicting a young child, a young girl especially, which goes against like the norms.
Here we are.
It used to be like boys were the ones interested with reptiles. Nowadays, I think more females are interested than men.
More
I think it's
in AHH than we do in males.
But seeing the girl so happy and in love with those pets, I love that advert. It was such a nice advert to see. And I think anything that normalizes the hobby is a good thing.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah. For me, it was always that king snake. I was like, it wouldn't live there. It's too swampy. But like, that's it's just because I'm annoying.
I mean, it's sort of, I suppose that you did get that with any kind of movie, though. It's like if the CG isn't up to par, or if it's a bit janky or whatever. And I think, me personally, I've always been quite good at suspending that. If the story is good and it's immersed, I'm not going to worry too much about the special effects or the little details if it doesn't affect the flow of the story. Some people, like, they see it like the special effects aren't great and they'll just like get upset and it just ruins it for them.
Right.
I mean, I've seen people complaining about the Luke Skywalker reveal at the end of The Mandalorian season 2. And it's like, if you're watching that scene and what you're complaining about is that the young Luke Skywalker doesn't look quite right, are you even enjoying the series, mate? Because that was like, I was literally watching that and screaming with my hands in the air when it came out. So there's
same
suspension of belief, I think, of doubt.
Yep.
I think that's a great trait to have for any fantasy nerd, because you can really get into it. Like you said, people debating, well, that's not a dragon, it's a wyvern, debating definitions of things that someone else made up, and someone else made up as well too. You can't say Tolkien's elves aren't elves and Keebler elves aren't elves because they're different, but they're both elves, right? And Santa's elves.
Just enjoy the story.
What?
Enjoy the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm for that. Let me ask this, which is why I like movies, and we don't have to get into it, but I love the Anaconda franchise. Like, I know those snakes don't act like real anacondas, and they're much bigger and much scarier. And it has this blurb in the first one that says, "The anaconda is the only snake that will regurgitate its meal so that it can kill again." Yeah, not just to eat again, but to kill, because it loves the killing more than the eating. Again,
it's a monster movie.
Yes,
I remember loving it when I was a kid. So it did what it set out to do. It made me I think I must have been 14 or 15 when I saw it. The first one, John Voight is amazing in it.
Amazingly bad in some ways, but
he's just such a schlock villain. He does it like, you can see he's having so much fun with it. So I love John Voight.
He's doing like a weird Tony Montana accent too throughout the whole thing, which
everything about it was just fantastic. It's also got J-Lo and Ice Cube, right?
Yep. Yeah. And Matthew McConaughey.
And Owen Wilson.
That's what I'm thinking of, not McConaughey. Was McConaughey in it? I'm thinking of Owen Wilson.
Owen Wilson is like, he's the first one to get eaten, isn't he?
Yeah, well, get my black and white guys mixed up.
So I enjoyed the first one, and I remember like loving John Boyd, just everything about that villain, like, just made it for me. He was like, snakes don't eat people. Oh, they don't. I just well, there's a bit where they dynamite a dam, and all the baby anacondas land on the boat, and he's like, babies, all the little babies. I always copy that, just because, I lift up all the little babies.
All the little babies.
It's pure insanity, and I absolutely love it. I mean, it's so crazy.
If you like, and
they're so fast.
It's a horror film. Yeah, they're so quick. Like, it is a horror film. It's like, I love the film Jaws. Yeah. Sharks aren't like that. Deep Blue Sea. I love Deep Blue Sea is a good film, but sharks aren't like that. So with all of these animal attack movies, they're all bullshit, because an animal will kill, eat, and that's it, and then it'll go for a while without doing it again. Whereas in, like, most of the films, they eat like a whole cast of characters in one night, and it's like, what the hell? How big is this thing's stomach?
Although there's another really great movie, and it's way off topic because it's tigers in real life and lions in the movie. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer?
Yes. No, in real life it was lions as well. So those were I thought they were tigers. Were real. And they were. I actually made a post about this because I painted figures of them.
Yeah.
So there was a tiger that actually killed more than they did. I think they managed to kill between 60 and 130 people. There was the tiger of Champawat, that killed hundreds of people, and then there was a leopard that killed even more. The Almora leopard. Like, leopards there's been quite a few serious leopards, man-eaters, because they used to come near villages in India, like remote mountain villages, chasing dogs. So man-eaters tend to happen when big cats, they get a bit too old or long in the tooth or injured to attack their main prey, and they find that humans are easy prey, and they start going for them. But the Ghost of the Darkness was very definitely a real thing, and they are actually on display in the Chicago Museum of Natural History.
Yep, I was about to say there's also one at I don't know if I think it was just there on loan per se, but there was one at the Binder Park Zoo as well.
Yeah,
for a little bit.
But those were definitely lions. They were I'm trying to remember it was a place in Kenya, and they were building a railroad there, and they just started going for the railroad workers, and they were killing several a night. It was a really weird. I don't think there's ever been a situation like that before or since, where they were just killing multiple people a night.
Right.
There was a film called The Ghost of the Darkness, which really exaggerated it a little bit. But no, that was a real thing. Those lions were real.
But for the most part, you're right. Animals they're just eating. They're not murderers and evil and cruel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're the one who's getting eaten, it's not pleasant. But
sure, perspective matters.
Yeah, definitely perspective. But no, I mean, I don't really think animals are good or evil. I think just they're animals. You can't really ascribe any kind of human morality to them. But yeah, there's been some really interesting man-eater stories. I used to live on those when I was younger. Henry Fawcett and Colonel Patterson, and the tiger hunts that they used to do. And reading their stories, you realize just how smart some of these animals were, and how difficult to track and catch, and how dangerous it was hunting them, because one shot very rarely put them down unless you got it, perfect. So often these guys would have to set the traps and the bait, wait for weeks or months to sort of encounter them. And then if they shot and missed and only got a graze or a shoulder shot, this thing would still be bearing down at you, and you'd have to load and shoot again, or have a second gun and shoot again. So like they're really quite exciting sort of pulp stories.
Yeah. The older I get, the more appreciation I have for just how intelligent animals are, and I think it's not necessarily just intelligence and it's even their emotional intelligence, but I think the biggest thing that I've come to realize after having a little bit of lived experience is that they're just always at that height, that live or die, fight for your life level. And if you haven't been at that level, you don't realize the next gear that you have to get into. If you've ever had like serious illness or serious injury or something, or confronted with it, then you realize this is like a different evolutionary peak. And for an animal, that's their norm, like they face death and extinction every time they go outside their little burrow, and sometimes in it. So
I'm often surprised how
I get more appreciation for that
as well. So I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a life or death for them, but they also the play that they can have, when they feel that they're not being watched. I think that modern, I'm not going to say internet, but modern thinking has a lot to answer for when it comes to making anthropomorphism a boogeyman. You cannot anthropomorphize, you cannot ascribe any kind of desire or want to an animal. It has to be cold, meticulous logic. And it's like, animals aren't really like that. Obviously, anthropomorphism is a very bad thing. But, and I've said this many times before, mechanomorphism, which is ascribing machine-like qualities to a living animal, is just as bad, and it's really an enemy for welfare as well. The truth is, we can't really understand what most animals are thinking. We are quite close with mammals. So dogs, for example, we've got a good handle on dogs, I suppose, because we shared 10,000 or 15,000 years of evolutionary history with them. Some might say they've actually, we've evolved together. Outside dogs, you've got cats,
and even then, I could find 3 different behaviorists who are going to tell you 3 different reasons, 3 different ways to train my dog to get him to. Oh, you can't do it that way. Your dog's never going to learn, and then someone else, refutes it as well.
And these people forget there's no, they're individual. they actually they have lived experiences that affect the outcome, that affect their personality. Absolutely. It's funny, like whenever I'm discussing topics with snakes, you'll be talking about UV, and people say, well, they're not all the same. Some just don't like UV. Yeah, okay, that might be true. I mean, I'd argue that it's very unlikely that the biology changes between one animal and the other. I think that it's something different that they're not liking.
Yeah.
But it's very quick how people will turn from they're all individuals to the moment that you sort of turn around and say, yes, they are all individuals because they learn and share different lived experiences, to no, they're all machines. There's very little kind of balance there. But yeah, I mean, I've got multiple, as you know, multiple snakes and lizards, and they act differently. They do different things. They share a lot of traits which you can use to standardize certain aspects of their care. They all like heat. They all like light. They all rely on a different amount of humidity. If you master controlling heat, light, and humidity, you master keeping most reptiles, and then you've got feeding. But within those parameters, there's so much leeway. There's so much that you can watch and observe. Is this beauty snake chill and just happy to sort of have you poke and prod at it and doesn't, or does this beauty snake dislike the face of Christian immensely and will attempt to murder him through the glass anytime he sticks his face near? And they're different. They're
totally not speaking from experience.
Totally not from experience. But
he's just prejudiced against Americans.
Yeah, could be that actually.
Well, this has been really good. We're a little over an hour. Not that there's a set time limit, but just kind of keep it a little bit digestible. So let's close it. Let's come to a good point. I want to ask you guys one last question, and be as broad or as narrow as you want with it. Which fantasy realm reptiles do you wish were real? All the dangers and benefits and considerations. So let's pretend for a second that we're 11 years old and excited again to just pretend that we could own these things or anything like that, whether it's owning them or interacting with them in the wild or hunting them or getting hunted by them, whatever it is. We'll start with you, Christian. What would you want to be for real and why?
I know.
You're thinking of something inappropriate, aren't you?
No, honestly, I was going to suggest that his character had a familiar that he asked to be a fairy dragon. And in a whimsy, I made it a fairy dragon that was suffering from
like corkscrew behavior,
like Royal Python behavior. I don't know why it came into me, but I just had this idea that he wanted this really beautiful, elegant thing, except that his eyes were going to be pointing in different directions and his head would be like upside down. And I really played that for what it was worth. I love that.
But no, I think for D&D, they're quite rare in the world for the most part.
You're actually going to go D&D Dragons? Bloody hell, you're crazy.
there's multitudes of them because we're talking all reptiles.
Right. Okay.
So there's the amount that are like literally bad is quite small.
Yeah, but the ones that, even though they're quite small, the ones that are bad are like can be world destroying. So
right, but you also have their antitheses
the good ones.
in the good ones. So like there's a lot of middle ground there. And you have cute cuddly ones that you can have as pets.
You do have cute cuddlies, yeah. I mean,
I'd say the safer choice would probably be reptiles from Magic the Gathering, just because I was telling Francis this. Most of the reptiles, aside from some of the really wonky fantasy-esque ones in that game, are either direct actual copies of real life animals that we have, or fantasy styled versions, like the Basking Root Walla. So it's just a Chuckwalla. It's just a little bit bigger.
See, I don't know much about Magic Gathering. I know that there was a hybrid between piranhas and rabbits. That's all I know. I remember that.
And there's the Prowling Serpapard, which is a cat snake.
Okay, I like the sound of that one.
What about you, Francis?
So I was going to go off on a whole thing about Monster Hunter World, which I love. The game is just amazing.
And then realized how bad of an idea.
And then I realized, like, look, do you really want to live in a world where you're basically Stone Age sort of tool set with monsters flying around? So the actual creatures are so well designed in that series, though. I love them. But if we're going to say one thing that I'm going to say it's going to be D&D, but it's not going to be what you're thinking. I would say a pseudo dragon. So it's a small dragon. It's about the size of a cat, telepathic, that basically it seeks out a master and becomes like that master's loyal servant as long as you treat it well. So it's kind of like a dragon with the personality of a cat. And, how can you beat that? Come on.
I don't know. No, that's great. It's kind of the best of both worlds and combine it, and I think it's a wonderful place to end it. So, guys, thank you guys very much for this and for staying up because I know there's a time difference. So I really appreciate that. And Francis, we've been talking for so long about making something, so I'm really glad that we were able to do this. So I appreciate you coming on, and the timing was great that Christian was there too. So that just really worked because. Frankly, you needed the relief, Francis. I'm just going to say it right now. Christian is much needed. No. So, guys, anything else you wanted to say before we kick you out of here?
No, thanks for having me on. It's been great. Happy to do another one.
All right. Well, the new one starts now. Let me just stop.